We have some massive updates on Jimmy Butler and what a trade could possibly look like in the next day for this Miami Heat team as the NBA trade deadline is quickly approaching. Let's get to it and break down all the news because there is a lot of it. So let's get to it and break down the huge updates on the Warriors/Butler trade. So last time we spoke was, I believe, yesterday, and again, the idea was that the Warriors and Jimmy Butler had a lot of traction going on between the two sides. It seemed like there was a chance there was actually going to be a trade done involving Butler going to Golden State, and again, Miami getting a bunch of good compensation in return, and now we have an idea of what that trade would have actually looked like, and really why it didn't happen. Well, we already knew that because, again, we broke this down on the last episode of Heat Digest, but again, the Heat's Jimmy Butler has communicated to the Warriors that he's unwilling to sign an extension there, and therefore trade talks to send him to Golden State have ended for now, sources told ESPN. Again, that is a quote from Brian Windhorst on his Twitter from February 2nd. Again, we broke this down, but now we know what that trade would have actually looked like if the trade was done. And again, this is a shout out to Drew Starr on Twitter, and again, this is a quote from Brian Windhorst on ESPN Get Up talking to Greeny, where he goes on to say, and I quote, essentially, the Warriors are trying to trade Wiggins and some draft picks for a star. That's just not going to get them very far. At least it hasn't, I will say. I think Miami was willing to do that deal for Butler. Let's see if by Thursday that gets revisited. And again, that is the end of the quote from Brian Windhorst. So again, the Warriors were offering Andrew Wiggins as well as other draft compensation in exchange for star Jimmy Butler. Now, I don't really have a big problem with that trade because we certainly have to get rid of Jimmy Butler or he'll sit on the end of this bench at home just doing whatever Jimmy does as an unemployed. That's something that he's called himself a bunch on social media. If you guys don't follow him on Instagram, he, again, calling himself unemployed, this, that, and the other. Again, he's been very disrespectful to this Miami Heat organization for the last 2 months, if you will. And again, it's just really unacceptable at this point. And they have to move him because if they don't, he'll get to free agency. He'll opt out of his contract. He'll walk to free agency, cause a bidding war for all the teams that seem to be interested in a disgruntled all-star who's going to really do whatever he wants whenever he wants if it's not going his way. And again, that's why his trade value has gone down so significantly during this season because, again, when he is on the floor, he's not the greatest player in the world. And again, he's very volatile, if you will, and it's very hard to understand which Jimmy Butler are we going to get today. And again, it wasn't a horrible trade from the Warriors. Andrew Wiggins is not the greatest player by any means, but again, he's been in the league for 12 years now. He's an 18-point per game scorer, 4.5 rebounds, roughly 2.5 assists per game. He's lengthy. He has the ability to defend on the wings extremely well due to the length and the size he has at the small forward position. Obviously, he would be a complementary piece to this Miami Heat team. He wouldn't be I don't know if he'd be substantial. I think he could help very, very greatly on the rebounding side of things as well as the perimeter defense side of things, which we greatly have to improve after last night's showing against the Chicago Bulls, which is just infuriating to think about. If you did not watch that game, I suggest you not if you're a Heat fan. It was at least the end of it. The third and fourth quarter were absolutely brutal. But again, let's stay on subject. Now, the reason this is all important about Jimmy Butler and what the trade package was from the Warriors and how that could still be present, because again, it doesn't seem like the Warriors are very much out of this idea of getting, or out of the trade scenario of getting Butler. And the reason I say that is because not only did Brian Windhorst say that there is still a capability and ability for the Warriors to go out and make a trade for Jimmy Butler despite him shutting down the contract extension, but Shams came on ESPN as well yesterday and said this: the Suns and the Warriors remain very key to watch here for Jimmy Butler. And that was the end of the quote. And again, Shams on the latest on Jimmy Butler's future with the Miami Heat. So again, despite Butler shutting down the first possible trade due to not wanting to sign in a contract extension with the Golden State Warriors, once he gets there, there's still a possibility that the Warriors go out and make a trade for the disgruntled all-star, because again, that would push the needle for the Warriors at least this season. It doesn't seem like they would be giving up a whole lot. But now let's just switch this conversation just a little bit, because this is where things get a bit interesting. Now, the Warriors have been calling, like we mentioned in past videos, highlighting the quote from Shams on ESPN, as he said, they've been calling everybody. They called the 76ers about Paul George. They called Milwaukee about Giannis. They called Miami about Jimmy Butler. They called LA for LeBron James. The list goes on. They need an all-star, and they are very publicly doing it. Like Shams Brian Windhorst are very publicly saying this on ESPN and other places, other platforms, that the Warriors are buying. They are attempting to go out and get any big name star they can to put alongside Steph Curry to allow the championship window to stay open for at least another year or two while Curry is obviously healthy. Steve Kerr is still at the helm, and they feel like they have a chance to really make a push in this Western Conference and really in this league for an NBA championship. Again, it seems like a far-fetched idea, but again, if they do go out and acquire a Jimmy Butler or a Kevin Durant, things could greatly change. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the most accurate thing in the world, but trending on Twitter, Jimmy for KD. Obviously, this is a bunch of delusional Heat fans, and I'm right there with them because now there is a huge, massive conversation between Jimmy Butler, between Kevin Durant, and the rest of the world right now, because the world is really just going nuts because there's reports that Kevin Durant could be available this NBA trade deadline. Another tweet from Drew Starr quoting Brian Windhorst, as again, this ties into this Durant point just a little bit. If there's a point where Jimmy Butler to Phoenix dies, I do think Miami could pivot and do another deal where Jimmy hasn't committed to stay playing. And that team will just take Butler and worry about the rest later. Again, and that's the end of the quote, but again, he's paraphrasing just a little bit here. If you listen to the entirety of the 1 minute and 20-second clip from Brian Windhorst on NBA Today, it's very, very interesting the way he says this. So again, they're having discussions about Jimmy Butler and the ability of him being traded, the possibility of him being traded, and where that would end up being to. He obviously mentions places like Phoenix, like the Golden State Warriors, and he goes on to say that if the Phoenix deal and Phoenix's inability to find a trade for Bradley Beal and obviously send Beal somewhere else to allow the contract financial problems to open up to allow to bring in Jimmy, because we know that there's not going to be a trade where Bradley Beal is sent to Miami and Jimmy Butler is sent to Phoenix. It's just not going to happen. It's going to take a 3, 4, 5 team trade, and it's going to involve Jimmy Butler going to Phoenix, possibly Beal going elsewhere, Miami getting a bunch of different assets from maybe the 3rd, 4th, including Phoenix. And again, all these teams, it's going to be a massive equation for this Miami Heat team to get this trade done. But more importantly, it's on the Phoenix Suns because they are the ones pushing to get Butler to Phoenix. Miami, I don't believe, cares where Butler ends up because they're not going to hold on to him, and they're not trying to give him exactly what he wants because he would probably end up in Phoenix already if that were the case. But now, Durant has a year left on his contract. He was ruled out with an ankle sprain for last night's game for Phoenix. There's a lot of conversation about him possibly being traded. If Durant ends up going to the Bay, if Butler ends up going to Phoenix, all in one trade. And again, I know this seems crazy, but everyone you listen to, whether it's Bobby Marks, Brian Windhorst, Shams, anyone that has any idea about the salary or the salary configuration, if you will, and how the first apron and the second apron and how all of this plays out, it seems very, very, very possible that the next trade we see, again, as the trade deadline quickly approaches, it's going to be 3, 4, a 5-team transaction. That is a quote from Brian Windhorst this morning on Get Up. A 3, 4, 5-team transaction most likely. And again, now it's no longer a quote from Windhorst. But again, the idea of Durant going out to the Bay, saving Steph Curry's championship window, reuniting in California, Butler going to Phoenix in Durant's departure, Wiggins going to Miami, as well as a bunch of other draft compensation and probably a few other small players, possibly Chicago being involved, or possibly even Milwaukee being involved in this transaction, and a dozen. And again, now I'm going back to the Brian Windhorst quote because I don't have it in front of me, and I apologize. I should have it. But again, Brian Windhorst on ESPN this morning mentions the fact that there could be a 4, 5-team transaction involving a dozen different players in order to get a trade done involving possibly Jimmy Butler, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Draymond Green, and obviously the Chicago Bulls could be in there, and dealing Zach LaVine, Vucevic possibly going to Golden State, again, Milwaukee being involved, trying to deal Chris Middleton as well as Pat Connaughton. There is a lot of moving parts. So if I were you and a basketball fan, stay close to Heat Digest as well as other Digest media channels, Thunder Digest, all Mavs Digest, whatever it may be. They're doing a great job trying to cover all of this news. It is craziness. And again, also turn on post notifications for Shams because it's crazy. I'll see you guys on the next one, hopefully with a whole lot of updates on this NBA trade deadline. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one.